My name is Yasmin Ludianski, and I'm going to be presenting on electronic waste in Guiyu, China. On pages 3 and 4, I'm going to be discussing what e-waste is. On pages 5 and 6, I'm going to discuss the effects of e-waste on the environment. Page 7 is going to discuss the effect of e-waste on public health. Page 8, I'm going to discuss an illustration, a schematic on how e-waste affects us. Page 9, I'm going to discuss the future of e-waste, and page 10 are my references. So, what is e-waste? Each year, we go through millions of tons of used electronics that have to end up somewhere when people recycle them from all over the world. Unfortunately, most of these electronic wastes end up at Guiyu, China, which is in south of China, in the town of Guiyu in the Guangdong province. Especially with electronic companies and technology companies releasing more products, such as Apple, there's more electronic waste that's produced, and therefore it ends up in places such as Guiyu, China, and poses a public health threat because of the amount of electronic waste at these sites. Guiyu was once a rice village, but unfortunately, due to the pollution created by e-waste, they are unable to drink the water there and eat the crops that are grown on the land due to the mass amount of pollution generated, since Guiyu is the largest electronic waste site in the world, which has posed a major public health issue. Not only is Guiyu the largest electronic waste site in the world, a large amount of this waste is contributed by other countries, such as the US, as one example. This is the result of transboundary pollution. Although this is illegal in China to import e-waste from other countries, most of the waste is foreign, and this is part of the threat. There are hazardous materials that are encountered by the individuals working in this area when recycling the e-waste, and they as a result go into different forms of pollution such as water and air. This figure represents a study that was done to examine the surface water compared by region in Guiyu, China. These researchers took a series of stations and set them up in various places in this specific area of Guiyu where the contamination was known to be, and areas around it, such as down the river, which will be in the next figure. This figure 1 shows us the concentrations of heavy metals in the station set up in Guiyu, China, in a pie chart that shows representation of the different heavy metals that were found. As you can see, their figure represents in percentages these heavy metals, and there are a number of heavy metals identified, such as copper, lead, nickel, cadmium, mercury, and arsenic. There you see that there's a favorable distribution towards copper and nickel here, and there is a substantial amount of mercury, almost 25%, which is much greater than when compared to figure 2. In figure 2, using the same study, we can see in the Lianjiang River, which is one of the water sources for the area, there is still contamination with heavy metals, but not as high concentration in the surface water as we see with Guiyu stations that are set up right near the contamination. We know that these heavy metals are very dangerous to us. One, for example, is mercury, which can cause peripheral neuropathy and nervous system changes. And depending on the proximity where these individuals live, closer or further from the contaminated sites, it affects the concentration of the water and thus affects their health directly. Aside from the threat of contamination of heavy metals in the water, there's other effects of e-waste on public health in Guiyu, China, such as lead levels, which can be very dangerous, which disproportionately affect women and children. This study demonstrated how lead is present in the blood of children in 2 different regions in China. So the regions of Guiyu and Haojiang are used in this representation. There are two interesting trends that we see here graphically. Guiyu, which is the e-waste epicenter, had substantially higher levels of lead in the blood in children in this study. And another trend that we see was that in both regions, boys experience higher blood lead levels. Lead poisoning in children is a major concern as it can cause brain damage and affects neurological and physical development. So this figure represents those findings. This figure is my hand-drawn representation of how e-waste directly affects the health of individuals and certain organ systems. So for example, the heavy metals that are extracted from the e-waste, such as old laptops, phones, computers, broken screens that end up in Guiyu, the workers that are exposed to them when extracting the valuable goods, such as plastic pieces that are redistributed and resold to tech companies, they're exposed to these heavy metals. For example, in this specific region there's a concentration of the e-waste, which is shown with the first arrow, and the second arrow shows how through pollution and through this e-waste these individuals in the area are ingesting the heavy metals and the waste that they're encountering due to where they live. That's why they can't eat the crops or drink the water in the area that they live in. And this affects different organ systems, such as the respiratory system, because they can inhale these fumes or vapors. As one example, it affects the nervous system, such as the mercury or lead poisoning in children. And there are studies to show that it affects the reproductive system, even to the level of DNA transcription. Which is just a few of the examples. And this disruption of the gene transcription process, these studies can show how transboundary pollution contributes and magnifies the problem, because we send our waste there from other countries. For the final figure, I used a study which looked at the present status of e-waste disposal and recycling in China. I wanted to get a temporal representation of the e-waste generation in metric tons over the years. This figure represents that as the change occurs from 2014 to 2016, there's a substantial increase in the electronic waste from all countries that are contributing, globally included. The compounding effects are seen in the difference. And although this figure demonstrates that there's an upwards trend in e-waste generation contributed by all of these countries, there is also no consideration for the changes that are being made, such as projects to clean up the e-waste sites in Guiyu, and also mandates which prohibit e-waste to be sent to Guiyu. And because of the public health concerns at Guiyu, there's advocates now in order to improve the conditions for all the individuals living in this area, and especially the workers at these e-waste sites.